On today's Hot Zone, we'll recap some of the adventures I had on my recent trip to Syria, and we'll give you an update on what's happening right now. That's coming up on today's episode.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hello folks, Chuck Holton here. I am back from Syria, back home, and I've got all my parts and pieces. Thank God, and thank you for all your prayers while we were gone. This was a pretty amazing trip, very eventful, let's put it that way. And we kind of knew it was going to be all along, but I didn't have any idea quite how rough this trip was going to be. So what I want to do is kind of step back and start from day one. Because if you were following podcasts, you know I didn't really have a lot of bandwidth while I was there, so I wasn't able to get out video podcasts of everything that happened. And so many amazing things happened that I want to show them to you. So if you listened to the audio podcast that I put out last week and the week before, you probably, some of this might be a little bit of overlap, but that's okay. I would highly recommend that you go to YouTube or you go to LifeZet TV and watch the episodes because we've got some incredible stuff to show you. So before I do that, though, I just want to give you an update on where we are right now. Syria is still an absolute clown show. The ceasefire that got extended supposedly permanently is not much of a ceasefire because Turkey and the Free Syrian Army are still blasting the heck out of everything in sight, and they're killing a lot of Kurds in the process. A lot of Syrians are suffering. So the Free Burma Rangers are still in Syria. They've now augmented their force to about 20 guys, and they got a bunch of medics, a bunch of ambulances, and they've had a lot of trouble getting those into the country, but they're doing the best they can with what they have. And you, our listeners and viewers, were able to help a lot of people while I was there. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in coming episodes. But suffice it to say, those guys are doing some really good work under fire. Here's a minute 20 of what something that just recently happened in the last day or so, some firefights that they saw while they were there. Check this out.
He yelled at me, says go around the back. That mortar just hit right here. 26 October. It's in front of it. I'm moving 2 vehicles back here in case we gotta jump in and move. And I thought, here goes a broken leg, but I'm not gonna be dead with a broken leg. I can crawl. And then I told the other guy to back up. Yeah, victory, man.
Okay, so now we're going to back up to day one of leaving Erbil and trying to get into Syria in the first place.
My thought process is thank you, Jesus, and we want to go where he sends us and goes with us. And right now we're in Iraq, Kurdistan, attempting to cross into northeast Syria today. We have one team member, Bashir, already there helping. We want to go help him and help the new church and the old church and everyone in between, our SDF friends, Arab friends, Kurd friends, share the love of Jesus, give medical care where needed. There's over 150,000 displaced now because of the attacks by Turkey and the Free Syrian Army. And we need prayer, though, to be able to wend our way through all the new relationships. Assad's come forward. It's a big mess, but God is bigger. So we hide behind him and go in his name. Dave Eubank, Free Burma Rangers with Chuck out here.
All right, it's a beautiful morning here in Erbil, and we are getting ready to move. We've got a convoy of armored ambulances like this one behind me I'm going to be driving, and we're heading up to the border crossing at Fish Gabor. And we're praying and just we're going to go and see if God will allow us to get in and take it from there. So be praying for us. Thanks. It's about 3 hours drive from Erbil to the Syrian border, and that's where we're headed. We've got a convoy of about 5 armored ambulances that Dave Eubank and his crew have that they use for humanitarian aid, for carrying medical aid to the people that need it up there. And we're heading to the Syrian border, not really sure if we're going to be able to get across. We're praying about it and we're hoping we can, but the situation is so volatile right now that it's kind of anybody's guess whether or not we'll even be allowed to get across into Syria. But if we are, we're hoping to be able to bring some help that's sorely needed right now by the hundreds of thousands of people who are being displaced from their homes by the recent fighting.
Ready?
Yeah, come closer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so things are evolving really quickly inside Syria, and I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of where we're at right now. As of Tuesday morning, the Kurds are still being decimated by not Turkish military forces, but by militia groups that are aligned with Turkey. And that's just a fancy way of saying ISIS, because these guys are these militia members escaped from Syria into Turkey back when Raqqa fell a year and a half ago. And once that happened, then they sort of switched sides and put on Turkish uniforms, or the Free Syrian Army. And now I think they're calling the Free Syrian Army the National Army of Syria or something like that. But suffice it to say, they're the same people that were fighting for ISIS in Raqqa last year. And there's probably 40,000 of them now. So that's really who the Kurds are fighting. But these militia groups have the artillery and aerial support of the Turkish military, which basically makes it very, very difficult for the Kurds to fight and win. Now, so far, from what we know, over 100 Kurds have been killed in the fighting. We don't know how many civilians have been are in that number, but probably about 40 Turkish forces have been killed altogether. So we're heading up to the border now. We're going to try to get across at a place called Peshawar and go into Syria to Qamishli, which was bombed. It was one of the first towns bombed when they started their offensive. The other development is that the Syrian army, the army of Bashar al-Assad, has now gotten involved. The Kurds, having been abandoned by their U.S. allies, knew that they wouldn't stand a chance against the Turks by themselves, and so they struck a deal with the Syrian military, who kind of was their enemy during the fight for ISIS. At least they tried to keep themselves separated. And what the Kurds had to give up in order to get that deal was essentially control of Rojava, this whole area of eastern Syria. And so the Syrian army has now taken control of areas around Duhok, areas around Hasaka and Qamishli. So we're not sure how that's going to affect us if we go in there. We could be seen by the Syrian forces as the enemy, or maybe not. So we're just praying about that. But the United States is now running around trying to clean up the mess that Donald Trump made by being so impetuous and deciding to pull out precipitously. When he did that, it set off the race for who's going to control this area. Now, it's not that the U.S. was in control of the area. We never had enough forces in Syria to control Syria to begin with. But we were sort of a tripwire on the border to keep Turkey from assaulting the Kurds. Now, it may be that the phone conversation that Donald Trump had with Erdogan, the president of Turkey, kind of went like this. Erdogan told the president, look, we know you've only got 50 troops there. That's not going to stop us. We're going to attack that area of Kurdish-held Syria, whether you want us to or not, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so in order to keep our forces from getting embroiled in combat and potentially getting in a situation where we would end up having to shoot at our own NATO allies, ostensibly, Trump decided to say that we're pulling those guys out. Now, keep in mind, we're not pulling all of our troops out of Syria. We still have about 1,000 troops in Syria, but they're mostly over on the Euphrates River. And what they're doing is they're keeping the Syrian military and the Russians from taking over the oil fields that are in that area. And they're still there, and they're going to stay there and keep doing that mission. Fairly close to the place where ISIS made its last stand in Baghouz. But that won't have anything to do with this conflict that's now taking place. And what we're seeing is that the United States really has gotten itself stuck between a rock and a hard place here, Iraq and a Syria place, I guess, because we can't shoot at our NATO allies, the Turks. We don't want to shoot at the Syrian military because they're backed up by the Russians. So you have to kind of keep in mind all of the proxies that are involved here. The Turks are against the Iranians. The Syrians are with the Iranians. The Kurds are somewhat aligned with Iranian. The Kurds are Sunni and the Iranians are Shia, so not aligned in that way. But the reason that we cozied up to the Kurds to begin with, or at least the Free Syrian Army, the Turkish forces, now, this is so confusing because Turkey doesn't like Iran, but the Free Syrian Army was sort of allied with Iran, and so were the provisional military units here in Iraq that were fighting ISIS, that we were kind of supporting. So it's like we're against Iran, but we, because of the Obama administration, had sort of allied ourselves with Iran. I mean, basically, this is a mixture of gasoline, diesel fuel, napalm, gunpowder, nitroglycerin, and a few other flammable substances. And the only thing that was keeping it all from going up in flames was the presence of the United States of America. And so even the hint that the U.S. was pulling out has set off this conflagration that we see today. And that is what we're driving into right now. So that's why we are covering this with a whole lot of prayer, and we're trying to be very discerning. I don't want to be a hero. We want to help if we can, but we want to be cautious and smart about what we're doing here. And so we're going to keep driving, and we're going to see how far we get. So that's all for now. Okay, we've just gotten permission to leave Peshawar and head into Syria. So we prayed, and here we go. So we had permission to cross for about 30 seconds, and then we lost it. And so we've got to take part of our group now. We're going to split our group. Some of us are going to go across the bridge and sleep in Syria tonight. The rest of us are going to stay back here and try again tomorrow to get our vehicles across. And not an ideal situation by any means, but right now this is what we've got, so we're going to roll with it. So we made it across the river finally. Some of us had to leave part of our team back in Iraq, and 5 of us got to come across into Syria with just what we could carry on our backs. And so we just finished clearing passport control on the Syrian side, and now we have to go find a place to camp. And so we're sort of backpacking around Syria and hoping to find a place where we can stay that won't get us lit up by somebody with a machine gun or anything like that. One cool thing is that back behind me there you can see the river crossing we just came across. So that's Iraq back there, and we drove across, and tomorrow we're hoping we can get our vehicles over here onto the Syrian side so that we can continue our mission. In the meantime, we just have to find a place to sleep where we won't get eaten by wolves or anything out here. And so this is an adventure for sure. Another cool thing is that I just got to talk to a Kurdish nurse who has been transporting patients into Iraq from Kurdistan or from Syria, and she said that most of the casualties they're seeing are civilians, many children. She said that's the hardest part, and she also said that she's really frustrated that this is happening. She said we just finally got rid of the scourge of ISIS, and now the Turks invade. Like, how much worse can this get? She's just very frustrated and sad over all that, of course, which makes sense. Her name I thought was really cool. It's Janda, which means sacrifice in Kurdish. So we're going to go find a place to bed down, maybe down here by the Tigris River. So this night keeps getting crazier and crazier. Just as we were putting our stuff down, trying to find a place to camp, we got a call after being told that we couldn't bring our vehicles across, and they said, hey, come get your vehicles. So now we're there's a hole there. Yeah, there's a hole in that bridge. So now we are on foot running across the bridge back into Kurdistan from Syria and going to pick up our vehicles and bring them back across into Syria, and I'll believe it when I see it. So here goes. We are running across the Tigris River right now and going to get our vehicles, I hope. This night, I would like to say could not get any weirder, but I know better at this point. Okay, we are illegally now back across in Iraq, and hopefully we won't get shot here.
وصلنا فنادونا قالوا موافقة جتي بالعربي. هسه ما صار 10 دقائق من عبالنا منها عبالنا الباص تعال.
You mean this doesn't happen every day?
بس بيجيك تعبان تجي الرايد وخلاص.
كان ما عندنا موافقة بالسيارات. هسه خذونا قالوا تعال اخذوا الاسعافات والعلاجات. Can we go? No. Oh, my major.
Well, after another hour of anxiously waiting on the Iraqi side of the border, we finally at 7:30 p.m. got the clearance to go cross into Syria. So I will believe it when I see it, but we are at least moving toward the border now with our vehicles in what really has been a miraculous turn of events today. Here we are, crossing the border into Syria once again, this time with all of our vehicles and baggage and a whole lot of answered prayer. Without a doubt, this has been one of the most incredible days I've had in years.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.